Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Hello, Andrea.
Hello. So happy to be here recording again with you.
Yeah, good to talk to you again. So today, Andrea and I are going to talk about why we cook ancestrally. And I think there's three sections to that. We're going to talk about what ancestral cooking means to us, why we do it, and then what it actually looks like in our kitchen, you know, the nuts and bolts. There's a lot to get through. Hopefully we'll get to everything. Just before we start, in my curious mode, we like to start by talking about food, which is normal. And I'd like to know, Andrea, what you had for dinner last night.
Well, this is actually really funny because I think it's the same thing I had on a different time we recorded. But so people maybe think I eat the same thing every week, but I don't. I haven't had this since the last time we talked, which is a while ago. But knowing today would be busy, yesterday I made in advance a big pot of red beans, and I cooked the H-bone from the pig that we butchered in the fall. And
what's the H-bone?
I don't know why it's called the H-bone, but it's just a fairly small piece that we cut out of the pig. Okay. I don't know really where the name comes from. And then we also had the secreto. I actually don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Which is another cut of meat, and it's like a really tender piece of the pork that's underneath the belly fat that you take out for the bacon.
Okay.
And it's really delicious. So we soaked the beans, then we cooked the pork and the beans together, and then I pulled the pork back out and shredded it, and then put it back in, and then I pulled out the H-bone. I shredded all the meat off and put the meat back in, and it is unbelievably delicious.
Did you put any spices in or not?
I did. I just threw in handfuls of everything. See, all kinds of
everything. All the spices. What's really interesting to hear you talk about what's really interesting to hear you talking about the meat is that the names of the cuts are different. So your cuts are called something else in the States to what they are in the UK, and the cuts are called different things in Italy, and they're cut in different places. So trying for me to learn the different cuts here in Italy to the UK so I can ask a butcher or know what I'm getting. Yeah. It's really interesting.
Yeah, a lot of the butchery videos I watched actually referred to that, saying, you know, culturally there's different cuts taken off of out of the same animal. You know, I used to always think, okay, well, what part of the animal equals what? But there's lots of questions. You know, if you're cutting up a pig for charcuterie, you'll cut long different cuts they'll look different. Whereas if you're cutting it for, you know, if I was just one person by myself buying a pig, I'd probably get lots of, you know, ribs cut and separated and lots of pork chops. And then butchering this pig for our family, and we always have lots of people over here all the time on the farm, then I primarily cut out large roasts, picnic hams, things like that, but big pieces that could serve a lot of people. And I just looked up the H-bone. It just means the rump bone. So I guess it's just.
Oh, okay. Now it makes sense to me. So do you want to know what I had for breakfast? Completely different to yours.
Oh yes, because you know your time zone, you're ahead of me. So I hope the future's good.
Yeah, it's nice. It's a bit misty, but it's nice. Yeah, I skipped dinner last night, so I was really hungry this morning, and I got out the last of our frozen raw goat's milk. The farm that we get our raw goat's milk from stopped producing because the goats don't produce milk over the winter, but I had some stash in the freezer. So I got that out and made it into kefir a few days ago. And then I made myself a smoothie this morning, which is something I like to do if I fast the night before, because it kind of keeps me not having carb for a longer period of time. And I'm trying to train my body
Right.
to be better at being a fat metabolizer. So I had some kefir, and then I put in loads of ground linseed, an egg yolk,
What seed?
linseed. That's flax, I
Oh,
think, for you.
linseed. Yes, that's right. Yeah, we call it flax.
And the cacao husks that were left from making a cacao tea yesterday. So it had a kind of chocolatey flavour. Some
Stop
cardamom
it.
and some cinnamon,
Stop.
and blended it all up. And it was thick
Ooh, that
and
sounds so
creamy
good.
and kefir-y and absolutely delicious. And the cardamom gave it a bit of a kick, which was lovely.
Well, it's kind of funny because I actually had a kefir smoothie for breakfast this morning too. But now I want to make yours tomorrow. So
I'd
sounds
recommend
really
it
good.
for sure. So let's get into what we want to talk about today, because I just have a feeling that it's going to take us longer than we thought.
What?
And I think because this is one of our first episodes, we wanted to try and explain why ancestral cooking is important to us and what it actually looks
Yeah.
like in our kitchen. Yeah,
Give us the basis for what everything else is going to be talking about.
exactly.
Why we even care.
So the first thing I think that's important to lay out is what ancestral cooking means to us. And
Right.
if I start by explaining kind of my take on it, and then we'll come to see if you've got something different to say. So for me, cooking ancestrally means going back to the way foodways were before industrialisation, when food was in the home, when food was with the family, when food was with people's hands, with community, and all the knowledge that came with that has been lost since industrialisation. So the knowledge of the cycles of our life, the knowledge of health, the knowledge of sourcing, the knowledge of techniques, the knowledge of raw materials, the respect that all of that engendered. That, in brief, is what cooking ancestrally means to me. What's your take on it, Andrea?
Well, that's absolutely beautiful. And of course, I agree with, of course, I'm over here nodding my head. It's interesting because I looked for a definition, what is ancestral cooking? And there isn't really a definition right now, other than every blog has its own take on it. But ancestral itself means of relating to or inherited from an ancestor. So what's kind of marvelous for us, and the podcast helps us do that, is you and I each have our own ancestors, maybe different. Maybe you and I might have some shared ancestors, since my family came from where you came from. But we also are so lucky we get to share, and it is shared with us, a lot of the things inherited from other people's ancestors. So you were telling me just before we hopped on how you were making a Turkish drink. Well, I don't think you're Turkish. I don't know if you have any
not at all.
Turkish ancestry, but we are so fortunate kind of in this day and age, I guess, that we can benefit from all the other ancestors that other people are willing to share their traditions with for us, which there has always been some of that throughout history, where you see crossover of seeds going to different countries or traditions kind of moving around. But gosh, with books being so widely available in internet, Instagram, all that kind of stuff, we can learn these techniques from a lot of different people. In a lot of different places.
I feel like there's so much wisdom out there, and now with the way that information passes across, we have the ability to mine the beauty of that wisdom and bring it into our lives, no matter where we are in the world, which is amazing.
I feel like industrialization, as you were saying, ancestral cooking to you is kind of pre-industrialization techniques, and that industrialization seems to me where cooking ancestrally almost became taboo. So sauerkraut, fermented things are gross, organs are gross. fermented things stink.
Mm.
Soaking beans. Beans are for peasants,
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to get to dive back towards that.
And bring those things back up and let them be seen for what they actually are.
Let them be in the light. Yeah.
So I also
And let
wanted to
people-
touch on... Go on.
I was just gonna say, let people try to reclaim some of their ancestry, wherever that is, and then also getting to share, like I was saying, with others.
Yeah. I think that brings us on to why we're doing it, because it's all well and good to go and find these things, but there's a big reason behind why both of us are going looking for these things and bringing them into our lives. And for me, cooking ancestrally is vital because the food system that we're living in and with at the moment, I feel, isn't sustainable. And the ancestral way of cooking respects the seasons, respects the animals, respects our planet, respects the body, respects our community, and therefore is a step towards making our food systems more sustainable. And I feel like the wisdom of our ancestors in these techniques comes from when food was made for health, for sustaining, for keeping people alive and for powering them, not for profit. And when industrialisation happened, food has turned into something that's being processed for profit. And I would like it to move back to a place where it's both sustainable and it's there and made for health, not to make people rich.
What a shock.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like you cannot separate the concept of food from the concept of land, but industrialization, the primary goal is literally to do just that. How much can be made in the lab? How much can be separated? In slavery is a huge part of the industrial food system to this day. And in the modern industrialized food system, we literally only get to see one aspect of our food. So it's like you're looking at, all you get to see is maybe the reflection on, some dim glass. Whereas when you get closer to the source, the land where your food comes from, you can actually turn around and see the real thing, all the colors and the shapes and the different issues surrounding it. And if you're going to eat ancestrally, you better have a pretty big why, because it can take more money. Doesn't always have to, but it's sure going to take a commitment and time and just a willingness to be industrious in your resources. So your why is going to have to be pretty high. And
I agree with you. I think it's a big commitment, and but the further you go into it, I started with little steps, just like most people do, and the further I went into it, the more I realised how important what I was doing was and how much it meant to me, and that gives me the motivation to carry on.
Well, there's people, and you and I know this both, who would have a hard time even living day to day without the benefit of the healthy food, and who would have severe health problems if they moved back into a processed food system.
I mean, we would, my family would, definitely.
So not suffering from certain ills certainly is a huge motivator for us.
Yeah, true. Okay, so let's get down to some actual practicalities and talk about what cooking ancestrally looks like in our kitchen. And we've got quite a lot of different things to cover.
Oh dear.
Try to put them in some sort of order. I think I would like to start by talking about the source, so our buying of food or our growing, our raising of food, and how that's done ethically and why that's a big important thing to us and what we do. Perhaps you could start by talking about it from your perspective, because you're actually on a farm and you've got animals there.
Sorry, somebody came down here. What did you just say?
As I said, talking about buying and growing food ethically, because you're raising animals there, so you've got a different point of view to me. So start by telling us from your end what that means.
Okay, So I love the order you put everything in, by the way. I think you did a really good job sorting.
Thank you.
There's a lot of messages flying back and forth for a minute there.
Yeah.
We we've only been growing animals for a couple months, so we're new to it from the perspective of being the owner. We've participated in it via other farmers for years, but it is definitely a different endeavor when you are doing it yourself. One of my friends looked at me the other day and said, "Boy, you're in this you're in this up to your elbows, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, it does feel like it because our dogs are still being trained, and one of them chased a bird, so we had to go through some training for that." And he's just like, "Boy, you got to be pretty committed." And growing food outside of the real commercialized, chemicalized paradigm tends to be more hands-on. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's harder. I think that can be a myth. I would definitely say there's a higher yield. I know there's lots of weird information flying around out there about, genetically modified crops are necessary to feed the planet, but it's really interesting that these kinds of, chemically grown produce can have a higher initial yield, but they don't tend to have as high of a yield over the span of time. So when we're talking like longevity of plants, the natural ones, the heirloom plants and the organically grown ones, yeah, it takes a lot more work, in terms of bugs. But it's more expensive in terms of raising animals. And if you're buying ethically raised meat, you'll probably see that reflected in the prices you pay. I know for us right now, this is a bad thing to say, but we're not selling our turkeys. We're just raising them for ourselves, but we couldn't even sell them for what they're worth realistically. Wow. Because we're paying them. Well, feels like it, but we're feeding them such a high quality, no corn, no soy diet. Mm-hmm. Of course, they free range too, but it's just not quite enough for them right now. So yeah, it's different. I definitely could have seen way cheaper bags of feed. Mm-hmm. And there's also breeds of animals that bulk up faster. There's animals that are basically bred to get really huge in a really short amount of time so that you can feed them for as short as possible and turn around and butcher them as quickly as you can, so you're not feeding them for 9 months like our turkeys take a minimum of 9 months.
So why are you choosing to feed your turkeys that way, and why are you choosing that breed?
For us, it's the breed kind of fell in our lap in a way. It's a heritage bird, and a friend of a friend who's a very responsible farmer. You do have to be careful who you buy your animals from, but she was selling them, and so we bought them from her. And so the breed specifically was sort of chosen for us in that sense. And then the quality of food that we're feeding them is because we're looking for a return in the quality of meat.
Okay. From a taste perspective or from a health perspective?
Both.
Both, yeah. They go together.
Yeah, beef is one that probably is most people's initially. Actually, I don't know anywhere that you can buy birds that were not fed corn or soy. But so beef is probably most people's exposure to finding grass-fed versus corn-fed, and the meat does not taste the same.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big difference.
So it's interesting to hear your perspective, because I live in a one-bedroom flat in a town in Italy.
Right.
And so I have no space for animals. And we have tried to go on a similar journey as to what's on our plate, but we've had to do it from a different angle completely.
Right.
So there's the option, the normal option here is to go and buy meat either from a butcher's on the high street or from a supermarket. And when we moved into this flat a year ago, I spent a lot of my energy trying to locate local farms that were raising animals ethically and were feeding them differently to the mainstream. And it took quite a while, but we were able to find 2 local farms run by people who've lived in this area for ages, just in the hills around our house, who really, really care about what they're doing and raise their animals on mostly pasture, and who raise them ethically, who think about what they're doing, who think about the consequences of what they're doing, and who one farm is certified organic, the other one isn't certified, but we visited both the farms ourselves and we've seen how the animals live, how they're treated, what they eat. We've talked to the farmers. And so we feel that eating meat from those sources is something that we feel good about. We feel good about supporting the farmers who have dedicated their lives to this when they could have chosen an easier path. And like you hinted at, I mean, we spend a large percentage of our disposable income on food. And, we're not a stereotypical family that comes to Italy from an English-speaking country and buys a great big castle and has money flying around. We're both creative.
We're castles.
Yeah. I know quite a few people with castles. We're both creatives and we both prioritise our creative life, and so we don't have a lot of spare money. We don't run a car, we don't particularly go on holidays if we could, we don't have TV, we don't have Netflix subscriptions. We spend the majority of our disposable income on food because it's really important to us. And I think this is one of the most difficult things when it comes to choosing ethically, the time involved in going and trying to find things and the money involved. But it's easy to start small, with farmers markets, and from that perspective, you don't have to dive in and just give your life savings over to a farmer every month. But in the same breath, I feel like to be in integrity for me is vital for us to put our money where our mouths are and support local farmers and give that health and that life back to us.
I love that.
So let's move on and talk about what we both eat, or what's involved in our kitchen, what we bring in from farmers. So I've talked about meat, and we eat meat here. We eat veg, which we're sourcing from local suppliers as well. We eat grains as part of our diet. We eat dairy to some extent, and eggs, and we also eat a lot of saturated fat on top of that. Is that the same for you, Andrea?
Well, I was looking for where you had your category of chocolate.
Chocolate's a little category on the side, and that's the sourcing of chocolate is a whole nother a whole nother episode.
Yes, we need to talk about that because I miss chocolate, but I'm also really concerned about sourcing it.
Yeah, sourcing's a huge thing, and
I look forward to that episode.
In the middle of it at the moment, but yeah. So a little bit of chocolate. There's a I don't know, 0.5% chocolate space in my tummy. The rest of it is filled with all the stuff I said, and also organ meat as well. That's part of me, organ meat.
Organ meat is awesome. I'm excited, as you said, you're getting a heart this week, and that's the heart. If anybody wants to start eating organ meat, start with the heart, because it's a muscle, so it's very similar to your regular meat, and there's just lots of great ways you can prepare heart. The things that you eat is pretty similar to us. We have fruit too. I don't know if you guys eat much fruit or not.
I don't, but the boys do. So yeah, we have fruit.
Okay, so we do. We don't have loads of it. Apples are pretty ubiquitous out here in fall. So, we eat lots of that in the fall. And the spending money on food, go back and forth on this. A part of me is resistant to what I see as, I don't know if these are the right words. I'm not going to try to like hurt anyone here, but the elitism of, or gentrifying foods that, like the things you and I are talking about used to be the cheapest. You know, not everybody
Yeah.
had meat. Meat's always kind of been a privilege, but I was thinking we should do an episode one day on one of my topics, a class that I've taught before, the 5 cheapest foods you'll ever make, which are also the 5 most expensive foods you'll ever buy. And those, for just pennies, you can make kombucha or water kefir, which are very expensive to buy. You can make sourdough bread. I remember one of our leanest times, I couldn't even afford to buy yeast, and all I had was sourdough. And, we bought the best organic flour, and we're still eating wheat. We don't eat wheat as much anymore, but we were still eating wheat at this time. And I remember making a huge loaf of sourdough bread, and I calculated the cost was, I don't know, 34 cents or something like that. And I thought, well, if I bought this at the store, it would probably be $10 or $12.
Yeah.
Sauerkraut and kimchi. Sauerkraut is literally cabbage, the cheapest vegetable in the store if you're going to a store, and salt, the cheapest seasoning in the store if you're going to a store, and kimchi, which you can add more things. You can put in whatever you want really for kimchi's. That's one of the cheapest things you'll ever make, and yet a pint can easily run, I don't know, $10. What is that? 18 pounds for you? Wait, no, it's backwards. Like 7 pounds for you, 8 pounds.
Yeah.
And bone broth. Again, we have not always been able to afford much meat. We have more meat and organ meats in our diet now than we typically have in the past, but we would make lots of bone broth to fill that protein gap.
Yeah.
And that is, again, one of the cheapest things you'll make, but buying good bone broth is obscenely expensive. And yogurt or kefir. Really good yogurt and kefir, pretty, can be pretty expensive. But once you start them, you can just keep them rotating over and over and over for years. So those become a pretty cheap thing to make in the house. And then, of course, anytime you think, boy, we're not going to finish this milk in time, just ferment it. Drag it out.
I've never really thought of it like that, but you're so right that these things, I've never bought them. I've always made them.
Right.
And maybe the reason why I've never bought them is because I've seen the price tag in the shops. But I naturally love to create anyway,
Of course. Well, I don't know. The reason I use the word gentrification, which is kind of a strong word to use in this context, but I see it as these have always been foods that have been prepared in the home by largely women, not in every culture, but largely women in a home or kind of village context. And then I don't know, again, I suppose you get back to the industrialization where instead of having these things made at home, they were removed from the home and taken to factories. And then, of course, you have nothing else to do at home, so might as well just go get a job. And now that they're priced so high, nobody can afford to make them. We can't make them at home either because we've got no time. Nobody can afford to buy them, but now we can't make them at home because we have no time because we're working somewhere else trying to make enough money just to buy processed food.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a vicious cycle. And I don't work a job outside of the home, so I don't know how to speak to it. But I know that all these things I just said, the primary reason why they're expensive is because they take a lot of time. But the magical thing about that time is very little of it is hands-on. Most of it's do a step, leave it for a day. Do a step, leave it for a day. And so if you're willing to just pick one of the 5 and learn the steps for it and kind of learn how you could you could cook the tea for kombucha in the morning before work, and then after work it'd be cooled enough that you could combine it with your starter tea, and then it just needs to sit there until it's ready for you to pour off and enjoy, you know? So if you're able to kind of schedule in, I mean, I even put things for food on my calendar.
Yeah,
so
so do I.
I knew it. If you're able to, I mean, you call it diary, right? But
Yeah.
if you're able to schedule those things in, I don't know. Again, there's things that always belonged to what do you want to call the peasant class? You know, those of us at the bottom of the food chain. And now that their health benefits are being recognized, they're basically removed from our hands and taken to really expensive, nice grocery stores with upside down, you know, wooden crates and chalk signs and things like that, and just out of our league now. But really, they're the things that should belong to everybody.
Yeah, amen to that. I agree with you. There's one other thing that I wanted to just go back on what you said, which is the organ meat, and say that, you know, I said that we eat meat, grains, veg, etc. But I would say that probably 50% of the flesh that we eat is organ meat, which means that our bill for meat is completely different to someone who would be buying, you know, steaks and mince and that kind of thing, because we pay virtually nothing for this heart. We pay hardly anything for the bones that we buy and make bone broth with, and it makes it a more affordable option for sure.
When we got our pig, which came from our friend's farm, beautiful, amazing farm, she hired a mobile abattoir to come out and butcher her 3 or 4 hogs, I forget how many. And because I called the abattoir in advance, I got all the organs from all the other pigs.
Wow.
For free. Because nobody else wanted them. So they just threw them in a cooler. I mean, and by throw, I mean, they literally launched them into the, I was like, oh, okay, thank you.
So would they have thrown them away otherwise? Would they have gone in the bin?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Just such a
possibly just with the guts. I know. And if I hadn't asked, they even called me back and they asked me, even when I was standing there 3 times, standing there with my kids watching them, they asked me, are you sure you want these? And I said yes, and I want the head. The heads of the other pigs I did not get because they do take all that meat and mix it in with the sausage. But I wanted the head of my own pig, you know, by itself. And they kept asking me, are you sure? Yes. But yeah, it was all free. So
yeah, amazing. And
organs and bones.
What you were talking about a bit after we were talking about organ meat was the idea of, you know, doing little bits, because these things aren't labour intensive. They're a little bit of work, but several times a day or once a day. And the next thing I had down for us to chat about was preparing all meals at home, because that's something that both of us do. We prepare 3 meals a day at home. But I wanted to start talking about that by saying that, you know, we might have 3 meals that are coming onto the table prepared at home, but I'm not necessarily spending an hour in the kitchen before each of those meals preparing it. But what I am doing is every morning when I get up, I'm going and I'm checking all the things that I've got fermenting. So we might have a porridge fermenting, or we might have the Suans drink, we've got water kefir, we've got all these other ferments. And I'm going and I'm spending 5 to 10 minutes checking them, stirring them, doing whatever I need to do. And that's how my kitchen time works. I kind of batch the things, and somehow all those things batched together produce our 3 meals a day. Now, sometimes I do spend, you know, time before dinner for an hour making something, but a lot of the time we're making things throughout the week, and then those become our meals. Is that the same in your kitchen?
Yes, actually, it's kind of funny. See what a good job you did putting all these topics in order. We can't help going. We're just flowing from one to the next. But Sally Fallon Morell wrote about, I don't remember what the dish was called, some name, you know, kind of for oats. But she said that this oatmeal was, it sounds kind of gross, but it'd be made and then poured into the top drawer
Yeah. Yeah.
like a dresser, and it would just sit there and basically ferment, and you kind of cut
Yeah.
out your pieces. And I think that was kind of the how to still eat while you're working in a factory 32 hours a day type thing. And that's also where we get the Irish soda bread, soda bread fast, because you're working. That was supposedly where that came from. But I did think about this the other night because we went out. We have one day a week where we have to run all the errands and appointments and things like that. And when we came home, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was we ate, but I had started the food, the day before basically. So there, there's there's just not really fast food in ancestral cooking. However, with enough of these kind of little steps like you're talking about, these little preparations, you have food that becomes very fast.
Yeah,
I would argue even faster than most processed food I've seen, that you can just kind of whip out at a moment's notice. But again, it does take that preparation stage in advance. And yeah, you can pay the fancy grocery store to do those preparation stages and get your beans already soaked and cooked, but they're going to cost more versus getting even the most premium bag from your local farmer and soaking and preparing it yourself. The thing is, you have to soak it and prepare it yourself. And that's the hard part again, because time is the part of the equation that's largely been taken away from us. So just finding ways to reclaim it.
I want to give an example from my kitchen, a simple example of what you've just described.
Yeah.
So generally, my son Gable goes to school 2 days a week here, and it's a Monday and a Tuesday. So on Sunday night, I'm preparing all the food that I'm going to pack for his breakfast and his lunch and my husband's breakfast and lunch, because he goes all day with him on the train and stays there and works. And so what I do is on a Saturday night, I grind up some grains into flour. At the moment, it's sorghum and millet. And then I leave those in water with a starter to ferment. So they become like a fermented porridge. Then Sunday morning, we cook that up. It takes a while to cook because there's a lot of it, maybe 45 minutes, into a kind of a fermented porridge, which we have for breakfast on Sunday morning. And then I put the rest of it into a loaf tin and I push it down and I leave it to cool. And it solidifies into what I call a polenta loaf. And then that goes in the fridge, and it can just be sliced and put in lunch boxes. It can be sliced off in the evening when they come home and either just put straight on the plate, which is really lovely because the sour flavour is stronger when it's cold, or I often just put the cast iron pan on and put some lard in and fry the slices up so it's crispy. And one of those loaves it runs out on Wednesday. We have other food as well. But that's an example of, I just gave attention to it once, really.
Right.
And then it's in the fridge and it's been pre-digested because it's fermented, and it's there for us to use. So there aren't, like you said, fast, in quote, options. But there isn't much faster than me getting out that from the fridge, cutting off a few slices and frying an egg.
There's no processed meal, that... I suppose microwave dinner, but I don't know if that counts as food. And my mind is just went in 63 directions. I'm just going to try to grab one line and pull it in. When you're talking about the packing the food to take out, that is definitely the most time consuming food project that we have, is that, it's really hard to find food that you can eat when you're out and about. There's not a lot of options. And so having food, and you can't tell me I'm leaving here in 15 minutes and I just open the cupboard and pull out some boxes of food, because I don't have that. So having things ready that seem like fast food, like a hard-boiled egg, that's like a fast food if you already have a big jar of them in the fridge. It's not a fast food necessarily if you're trying to rush out the door right now and you have to stop and boil it. but
Yeah.
even that doesn't take tons of time. But, if you have a jar of them already in the fridge and you have a container of black beans already cooked in the fridge and you have a big wad of spinach or something or some soaked fermented grains, you can throw together pretty stinking decent salad in under 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But it was all things that took you time to prepare. You had to soak the beans and you had to cook the beans and you had to soak the grains and ferment the carrots and all that. But, and not to, I don't want to intimidate anybody listening thinking, well, I guess I don't have the time for that. I can't be doing all of that, because we're coming at this from the perspective of already being a few years in. And I think, Allison, you would agree with me. Neither of us started from day one like, well, everything I eat goes through this rubric now of perfection. It's just one little thing at a time, kind of chipping away and then starting to, and you don't realize it until you just casually say, or I look at my plate and I think, wow, if I had to do all of this, I've thought this many times, if I had to do all of this today, make and ferment the salsa, make the sauce, make the whatever, it would be such an overwhelming, monumental amount of work. Yet I'm sitting here looking at my plate thinking, boy, that was a fast, easy dinner to just throw together. Because it was just jars of things I kind of yanked out of the fridge and stuff that I did months ago. Some of it, honestly, some of my ferments I did years ago. So... so it just took me seconds to put together now, but the preparation process was in the past.
Yeah, I agree. It's the same here. And yeah, I didn't start doing it all. I remember I started with raw milk kefir. We found some raw milk and we got some kefir grains and we started
What a
making
great
raw
place
milk
to
kefir.
start.
And
That's
it's been like
complex...
a snowball rolling, picking up more and more, and then picking up my curiosity and all my particular idiosyncrasies. But yeah, it just started with milk kefir.
Yep, and that's a complex ferment from microbiological perspective, but is one of the most stupid simple things you can make.
Yeah.
I'm the worst. I don't even use kefir grains. The one of the gals that I used to get my raw milk from years ago, she'd been making her kefir for 15 years, and so I asked her, "Oh, can I have some of your grains?" And she goes, "My what?" She goes, "I don't even use grains." She just pours some of her starter kefir in her jar and adds her raw milk every morning, and then the next day she drinks that pint, and so she just keeps it rotating. It never builds the SCOBY, but she just keeps it going forever and forever. So I've been doing that, and I don't know, not a problem.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit more about soaking and fermenting, because it's so fundamental to ancestral cooking. From my perspective, I don't eat so many beans. My husband eats more beans. All our beans are soaked with a medium, like a apple cider vinegar or lemon juice, before they're cooked. Our grains are all soaked in some way. Most of them are fermented. So we used to just soak grains, but now I'm so into fermenting that we basically ferment all our grains. So I'm making fermented porridges, which again I make into things like loaves afterwards as well. All of our porridges we eat, whether it's oats, whether it's millet and sorghum, whatever it is, whether it's spelt, are fermented. I make sourdough, so that's obviously a soaked and fermented grain. The other way I use grains are in drinks. So I make the Turkish drink that you mentioned earlier, which is called boza, which is millet. I'm experimenting a bit with making that with sorghum as well now. And I make suans, which is a Scottish drink made of the husk and kind of crumbs of whole oats. Outside of carbohydrate, we make water kefir, we make milk kefir, we make sauerkraut, and then we make kind of various other vegetable ferments. I always have a garlic on the go. I think fermented garlic is the most medicinal, amazing powerhouse you could ever have, and I'd recommend that everyone has it in their medicine cabinet.
Yeah,
But we also
probably.
have, Jerusalem artichokes are in season here, so I fermented some of those.
Ooh,
I make
yum.
fermented carrots sometimes. And basically all of our grain processing, a lot of our vegetable processing, and all of our drinks, apart from kind of teas and that kind of things, are fermented, and our day is peppered by those fermented foods. And it's so fundamental, those techniques from all over the world, and the slow accumulation of my knowledge and practice with them has become, I think, the mainstay, apart from the meat sourcing and the organ meat of our ancestral kitchen. You feel the same?
Yeah, and I feel like I should add too on what you said. A big reason why we have all these different cultural ways of preparing foods, kind of incorporating, your ancestors, my ancestors, other people's ancestors, ancestors of people I've never met, is because our diet, even when you're eating locally, it is more diverse than it was 600 years ago. So me having certain spices or grains that maybe didn't grow here native, you know, knowing how to prepare them so we can, you want to have chocolate? Well, chocolate wasn't everywhere, I don't live in a jungle. I doubt if there's any chocolate out here. But how now that I've been introduced to chocolate, I can't close that door. So I need to learn how to prepare it properly. And so that would mean borrowing some from someone else's ancestors, so that I can learn the sort of proper nutritious way to do it. And soaking and fermenting makes everything better. And I imagine pretty much everybody listening to this already knows that fermentation is not an ethanol fermentation. So we're not making alcohol. I mean, we have, but we're not making alcohol out of most of what we're eating. In fact, I don't even think the fermentation we're talking about is actually a biological ferment, but that's the term we use for the process. And it's basically, you referred to this, but it's a predigestion of things. Yeah, our beans, I like to soak them with a little bit of whey. Or lemon juice, like you said, is good too. But I like the whey, but I also tend to have just like, what am I going to do with all this whey sitting around? So I don't ferment everything, but that doesn't mean I don't want to. I think you're ahead of me in terms of how completely you have the fermentation incorporated in. I still feel like sometimes, like we bought these tortillas. They're these really nice, it's a small business, organic, kind of local tortillas, but they're not fermented. So the corn ones are soaked in lime in that traditional process, but the flour ones aren't. So then I feel like there's sometimes these compromises that come in between, but every day getting closer to kind of my mental ideal. And whenever I'm preparing a food in what I consider an ancestral method of preparation, I always find myself asking, why did they do this? So fermenting, as we already alluded to once, preserves your things, preserves your foods for a lot longer. So refrigerators and freezers are new on the scene. Canning is new on the scene. Fermenting is the oldest and the best, I think, preparation. But it's also less common and more expensive in grocery stores because it can also tend to be a little more volatile. And I do mostly wild ferments, which means I ferment things with kind of the ferments that whatever kind of draws from the air.
Yeah.
But I also do lots of inoculated ferments. So water kefir or, milk kefir would be an inoculation with a specific culture. Whatever my kefir originally started with, just putting that little bit in there. It's my chosen specific inoculation versus I have done some milk, like clabbered milk, but that's not really a ferment necessarily. I guess it kind of is.
It's an ancestral process.
Right. Yeah. but it's not inoculated. You kind of just get what you get. But then like all the krauts and the kimchis and the veggie ferments and things like that are wild. So I just mix in the salt and the cabbage, and then sort of come what may. Come what may is what the ferment I get.
The thing that we haven't, I don't think we've mentioned around the ferments is that huge health benefits, you know, the probiotics that are made in the fermentation process. And then that goes into our, you know, the commensurate bacteria in our intestines, and they go to work with those doing good things. And then the research I've been doing recently on probiotics is then after that's happened, there are things called post-probiotics. And then in sourdough bread, even though you cook the sourdough bread, so you think, well, what's happened to the probiotics? But that creates things called paraprobiotics, which have another role in the immune system. So, you know, even cooked probiotics are doing things to our health and changing the way that our cells are. And so this whole process, yes, it does preserve the food, but it also creates food that creates health at the same time.
Absolutely. And I think that's maybe part of why I've been able to get away with still having some non-ancestrally prepared things mixed in, is because there's a lot of good stuff going on. And every little thing that you start adding in, I feel like you start to notice the benefits of it. And so then it's very encouraging, because then, you know, when you kind of swap something else out and bring in the good thing, then you're going to notice more benefits. So it motivates me to keep on keeping on. And when you're eating local as much as possible, you almost kind of have to eat ancestrally, because you're just not going to find a lot of the ingredients that are in modern recipes like on a farm. You're just not. So you kind of end up finding the recipe that has the ingredients that you have, and then just by default it's going to end up being some old school hammer and ferment type thing.
Yeah. I'm aware of time. We're getting close to time. I just wanted to for you to share a bit about how you buying bulk and you're kind of shopping as a project, and then how you can and freeze, because I know you do more of that than me, and I can talk a little bit about seasonal shopping and eating here, but talk a bit about buying in bulk and how you process those purchases.
Yeah, so buying in bulk, I sometimes do and I don't always, but buying in bulk is kind of a cheat on the buying seasonal, eating seasonal. So if I'm buying my blueberries in the summer and freezing a lot of them, and then I'm eating blueberries in the winter, well, I'm no longer eating seasonally, because I'm eating blueberries in the middle of winter when you don't normally have blueberries. They were purchased or picked seasonally, so they have that nice, delicious, nutritious quality to them, but it's not really seasonal eating. So I suppose you could just eat local, but sometimes it's a nice stopgap in between to buy bulk and then sort of spread it out over the span of a year. Maybe your area is not super vital at certain times of year, or maybe you just don't have an entire staff. Like, I'm thinking of Rene Redzepi's team in Denmark. Is it Denmark? Is that where they are? Copenhagen, I think. I don't know. But his amazing restaurant where they really savagely only eat in season. So they're serving you like, you know, sea foam on a piece of moss and stuff like that. It's all so seasonal. I just adore that. But he has a whole staff, right? And people like out on ice floes looking for, you know, bacteria that they can serve up or something. So
wow.
They're really admirable. But so sometimes it's just easier to buy things and prepare them in advance if you have the room. And by have the room, I should say that right now we live in the largest house we've ever lived in. We've lived in, you know, apartments, duplexes, attics, basements, and we've had stacks of canned food and crocks of ferments in our bedroom
under the bed.
Yeah. You have to like walk around them to get through the house. And so, there, the decoration in the side table is just containers of food and stuff. But so it's not like we have huge pantries where we put everything, but we do have the luxury of not having all our food in our actual living space right now, which is a first for us. It's an absolute first. So don't think that is necessary. We will buy bulk from different farmers. If I know a farmer who's growing something I really like, then I rarely will ever ask for a bulk discount, because I know what a lot of work it is. I've been on the other end of the cash register, and I know what a lot of work it is. And I know that sometimes it can feel like your work is being discounted. But a lot of farmers will offer me, they say, hey, if you just want to get all these boxes right now, or maybe these will only go for another day if you'll take them off my hands, so I'm open to that, of course. We'll sometimes do that with fruit. I think pretty much all we did this year fruit-wise was blueberries and a little bit of peaches and a little bit of apples from our neighbors. But so we'll can some of it. We'll freeze some of it. We'll ferment lots of things, but not everything's, if you ferment apples, then you have a different product altogether. So, we did a little bit of that, but it's not the same as fermenting cabbages. So, and then, we got lots of carrots. There's a farmer selling his second carrots. So, carrots that look really funky or have like a worm in one half of it or something like that. And he's just this old school organic farmer on the side of the road where we used to live. And so we fermented. I still have one jar left of that in the fridge, but we fermented a lot of his carrots. And then we do freeze pretty considerable portion. Right now, all of our meat is frozen versus fermented. And I did not can any meat this year, although I have before. Sometimes I'll can meat if I just need to get room in the freezer for something that can't be canned. And we have some frozen fruit and we have some canned fruit.
I've always been amazed, when I've seen the pictures of your canning on Instagram, just the sheer volume of it. Because from a European perspective, or at least from our perspective, we don't really buy in bulk at all. I think that's partly because, number one, we don't have a car, so it's hard to carry it all.
Right.
But number two, fruit's available all year round here. There's always something that's available.
Wow.
Veg are available all year round. So the largest thing we really buy is meat. We get our meat every 2 weeks, so we use our freezer for that. But we don't have a big freezer. So really, the only thing that's in our freezer generally, apart from some loaves of bread I've made and stock, is meat. And I feel like we've got a completely different perspective on bulk buying in that we don't do it. Our shopping is still a project because we don't have a car. So Rob has to carry everything. We have to go to the farmers and get the meat. You have to carry it home. Rob runs up the hill to get the milk. And so we still have to plan very much. When are we going to have these grains? When's our meat coming? What am I going to do with it when it arrives, etc.
Right.
But we don't can, and I really don't think there's as much of a culture of canning in Europe as there is in the States. So it was always quite surprising to me, when I first started seeing your canning pictures, just the vastness of the scale on which you're canning.
Well, it's funny because a lot of the early stages of canning development came from Mr. Napoleon.
From
and
Europe,
his desire
definitely.
to transport food for his soldiers. It was funny. I haven't even done any big canning projects since we moved out here, so I wonder what you would think if you saw the big ones.
I just wouldn't know what to do. I'd have to sit down. There were so many vegetables, I think.
I sit down a lot, but well, when you put a couple families together and you figure, hey, if we each want to have a jar a week, that's 50 jars each, and then you figure out how many pounds go in a jar, and you start working backwards, you end up with a pretty big pile pretty quickly, and you got to have a plan to get it in through the doors of the storehouse, in time. So it's fun. I enjoy the strategy of it, I guess.
Yeah, the logistics, the kind of, yeah,
logistics.
I can resonate with that. So as we wrap up, maybe we've talked about a lot. I mean, there's still a load more I could talk about, but there's nothing
Days
new
worth.
there. Let's just kind of recap on what we think are kind of easy ways to start in this world, or things that we think are most important in our kitchen. Tell me what you think would be something, rather than taking on everything all in one go, something that people can take on if they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by everything we've covered.
Don't take it all on at once, or it's going to be a sad time. Well, I think the big arms of this are your sourcing, your personal skills, and your knowledge of ancestral food preparations. So my suggestion would be, if you're in the States, you can look on eatwild.com, or what's the raw milk website? Find raw milk or something like that. But you can start to maybe find one thing sourced by you. Don't try to do it all, because that's a great way to have an aneurysm. Ask me how I know.
Yeah.
But if you just pick one thing, and if you're like me, you moved 10 times in 10 years, and so you have to do this 10 times, but it's worth it. So pick one thing that you can find. Maybe for you, you just think, all right, I'm just going to find some piece of meat local. Or I'm going to find a veggie. Okay, so pick one thing. Then pick a skill. I think learning a skill that don't have to start with tempering chocolate. But ferments are so wicked easy. So the sauerkraut's a good one to start with. But any of those 5 that I listed, the kombucha or water kefir, or sauerkraut or kimchi, or sourdough bread, or kefir, like milk kefir or yogurt. Those are really easy things. Or bone broth. It's not a ferment, but I'll put that in the list of cheap foods. Pick one of those skills, because I think once you do it, it's not as intimidating or monumental in our mind.
Yeah, completely.
And then the third would be these ancestral cooking skills. So you're already listening to this podcast. You're obviously doing your due diligence to gather knowledge wherever it's being left. Find a book that you like. I love Sandra Alex Katz's book, The Art of Fermentation, or this other book, I think it's called Wild Ferments. That's the art of fermentation is not recipes. So if you're looking for recipes, that's not the one. But Wild Fermentation or Wild Ferments. I absolutely love that book. And you can learn, just pick one recipe and just make it your skill. Of course, Nourishing Traditions is a good one, or Traditional Diets, or Nourishing Broth. Any of those Sally Fallon Morell books is a good one, because she puts there's like stacks of skills, and then kind of paired with the history of why you're making that way. So that would be my kind of top recs.
I think the only thing I'd like to add to that from my perspective is that I think it's just important to go with your joy. And so if the thought of sauerkraut kind of just doesn't do anything for you, but you like the idea of having some kombucha, then go do the kombucha. If you don't want to cook stocks, but you love the idea of making yourself a smoothie that's full of probiotics, then think about raw milk and kefir. It's really important, or it has been for me, certainly, in my journey, that I just follow the river of kind of joy and curiosity and passion. And that's what's moved me into this kind of snowball place where all these things are now part of my life. It started from, what's exciting to me? What's joyful to me? What do I want to eat, And so that's what I'd say.
I agree
just pick the
with
thing that brings you the most joy and do that.
I don't know about you, but if I don't like it or I ain't interested, it ain't happening.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree. Yes.
Is there anything else you want to add before we finish, Andrea?
This was beautiful. I'm so grateful to you for collecting this topics together, and this was just fabulous, and I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, I'm hoping that people who are listening have got something from it. This is one of our early episodes, and hopefully through the last episode you've got to know both of us a little bit, and now you know a little bit more about our kitchen and what we do. And we're like a ship. We're about to sail off into uncharted waters and bring you, hopefully, lots more information and have lots more fun in the process.
Yes, the dawn treader strikes forth.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at Ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.